The air inside the royal medical tents hung thick with the metallic scent of blood and burning herbs. As Lisal stood frozen in the center of the crowded space, her simple Omega healer robes stained with the day's work. Lantern light flickered across the rows of wounded soldiers, their groans filling the canvas walls. While the Alpha King Davil loomed at the head of the assembly, his powerful frame casting a long shadow that seemed to swallow the light itself. She had only meant to help one soldier whose deep gash refused to close, but the moment her hand hovered near the wound, the injury had begun to reverse, the torn flesh knitting backward with a strange shimmering glow returning perfectly to unmarked skin. Gasps rippled through the tent, followed by shouts of dark magic, and the lead physician pointed at her with trembling fury. "This Omega is cursed," he cried. "Wounds do not heal like this, they age backward, as if time itself bends to her touch. She is too strange to remain among us." King Davil's eyes locked onto hers for one fleeting second, and in that heartbeat Lisal felt the faint warm pull of the mate bond stirring between them like a hidden current beneath still water. But his gaze hardened into ice, and his voice rang out across the tents, cold and final. "Banish this strange girl from the medical corps and from the palace grounds. Her presence brings only unnatural fear, and we have no room for such weakness beside a king." The words struck Lisal like a physical blow, her heart shattering in her chest as humiliation crashed over her in crushing waves. All her quiet years of tending the wounded dismissed in a single moment by the man destiny had chosen for her. Tears burned her eyes as soldiers stepped back, forming a path of rejection, and she turned and ran, her footsteps pounding against the packed earth, carrying her out of the tents and into the wild forest beyond the palace walls. Which country are you listening from? Please comment below. I'd love to know how far this story reaches. As the palace lights faded behind her, Lisal wrapped her arms around herself, the night wind whispering through the trees, while the faint rejected mate bond lingered in her chest like a distant ache. She had become the strange one again, the invisible healer, now hunted for a gift she never asked for, yet deep inside her the power that reversed wounds still hummed, waiting for the moment it would prove that the powerless could undo even the king's greatest mistakes. Little did Davil know that by casting her out, he had sent away the only soul capable of saving him from the cursed blade that now waited in the shadows to claim his life. The wild forest stretched endlessly around the hidden clearing like a living labyrinth of ancient trees and tangled undergrowth, where sunlight filtered through the canopy and scattered golden shafts that danced across the moss-covered ground. Lisal moved through the morning mist, her simple exile cloak torn at the hems from weeks of wandering, her bare feet sinking into the damp earth as she joined the small group of forgotten Omegas and outcasts who had carved out a fragile life among the shadows. Each day began the same way, with the distant sound of Alpha patrols riding the perimeter paths there, horses' hooves thudding like warnings through the trees, while the outcasts scattered to forage for berries, roots, and edible greens, their movements quick and silent to avoid drawing attention. Lisal bent low, gathering clusters of wild herbs, her fingers brushing against the cool leaves as the sharp scent of pine and earth filled her lungs. The Alphas would circle closer, sometimes their commanding voices barking orders that echoed off the trunks. "Keep moving and stay clear of the trails," one would shout, his tone sharp as a blade. "We have no use for strange ones like you, bringing curses to the wild." Lisal would comply, her head bowed low to hide the quiet defiance that still burned in her eyes even after the banishment that had stripped her of everything. In her inner thoughts, the rejection from the medical tents replayed like an unrelenting tide, the Alpha King's cold declaration calling her too strange and banishing her from the palace grounds, still echoing through her soul as he had ignored the faint pull of the mate bond that had stirred between them in that fateful moment. Yet even as the hurt threatened to drown her, a quiet determination began to take root like the hardy ferns clinging to the forest floor. She was invisible here, just another forgotten soul scraping by in the wilderness, but that invisibility offered a fragile freedom to nurture the secret gift that had begun to awaken within her, the power that reversed wounds in ways no one understood. As the sun climbed higher, the foraging continued, with the outcasts carrying woven baskets back to the makeshift camp, their muscles aching from the effort, yet their soft conversations weaving a tapestry of shared resilience under the watchful eyes of the distant patrols. During the midday break, they gathered beneath a massive oak tree, sharing simple meals of forage, roots and dried berries, the scent of crushed leaves mingling with the constant rustle of the forest. An elder Omega named Mira, with her weathered face and kind eyes, often sat beside Lisal, offering words of comfort that felt like a gentle breeze in the heavy air. "You carry a heavy burden, child," Mira would say, her voice warm and steady like the steady flow of a hidden stream. "The palace may have turned its back on you, but the wild has its own ways of remembering those who touch what others fear." Lisal would look up, meeting the woman's gaze with a small grateful smile, her heart aching with the memory of the king's rejection, yet finding strength in the elder's kindness. "Thank you, Mira," she replied, her voice soft but filled with quiet emotion that carried the weight of her unspoken pain. "It is hard to forget how they called me strange and cursed how the king laughed at my gift and sent me away, but your words helped me hold on to the hope that maybe there is more to my story than exile." The dialogue brought a measure of peace, but inside Lisal's mind the thoughts swirled with greater intensity, the mate bond's faint tug from the distant palace, still causing her heart to ache with unanswered questions. Why had the king rejected her so harshly when destiny had clearly marked them for each other? She pushed the doubt aside, focusing instead on the one thing that gave her strength, the secret moments she stole away each twilight when the patrols had ridden on and the camp grew quiet. In those hidden hours, Lisal would slip deeper into the forest, her footsteps light on the mossy ground, until she reached a small glade where wounded animals often sought shelter. There she would kneel beside a fox with a torn leg or a bird with a broken wing, her hands hovering gently as the gift awakened the injury, shimmering and reversing with that strange backward time sensation, the flesh knitting perfectly back to wholeness. The power flowed through her like a quiet river, not dark magic, but something pure and ancient that made her feel seen for the first time since the tents. Her inner thoughts swelled with empowering clarity, the journey from banished healer to this hidden sanctuary, proving that the powerless could undo what the strong could only fear. "This gift is mine," she thought, the realization blooming like dawn after endless night. "No longer will I let their labels define me." The forest around her seemed to breathe in response, the leaves rustling softly, as if the wild itself approved. Yet as the days blended into one another, a subtle change began to stir in the air around her. One evening, while she reversed a deer's deep gash, the ground trembled ever so slightly, not from the forest, but from the distant echo of riders approaching faster than before, their horses' hooves carrying the scent of urgency and steel. Lisal froze, her breath catching in her throat as a fleeting vision flashed across her mind, the Alpha King's figure riding alone into the wilderness, his powerful frame tense with pain from a wound that deepened with every passing hour, the cursed blade's curse spreading like shadows across his arm. The mate bond pulled sharper now, the call of his need mixing with the distant sound of the approaching patrol, and she knew the kingdom that had cast her out now teetered on the edge of ruin. Only her strange gift capable of saving the man who had once called her too strange. The Alpha riders drew closer, their voices carrying on the wind, and Lisal slipped back toward the camp, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and unexpected hope as the mini cliffhanger of pursuit hung in the forest air like the first distant rumble of a storm that could change everything, leaving her suspended between the safety of hiding and the pull of a destiny only her reversal could fulfill. The twilight forest wrapped around Lisal like a living veil of emerald and shadow as she slipped deeper into the wild beyond the outcast camp, her bare feet silent on the mossy ground while the last rays of sun painted the leaves in hues of gold and crimson. She had come here alone after another day of foraging, her heart heavy with the weight of exile, yet drawn by an invisible pull that refused to let her rest. The air carried the sharp scent of pine, and damp earth mingled with the faint metallic tang of blood that led her to a small glade where a young deer lay trembling, its leg torn open from a hunter's trapped the wound raw and pulsing with every labored breath. Lisal knelt beside the creature, her hands hovering just above the injury without touching the mate. Bond's faint tug from the distant palace mixing with the quiet desperation in the deer's dark eyes. In her inner thoughts, the humiliation from the medical tents replayed like an unrelenting current. The Alpha King's cold voice calling her too strange and banishing her still echoing through her soul. As soldiers had shouted of dark magic when wounds reversed unnaturally around her. She had run from that pain into the wilderness, yet here in the hidden heart of the forest she felt the strange gift stirring again, not as a curse, but as something alive and waiting. With trembling fingers she pressed her palms gently to the deer's injured leg, the power awakening in. A rush that sent a shimmering sensation through her veins like time itself flowing backward in delicate wave. The torn flesh began to reverse the ragged edges, knitting together with perfect precision the blood, retreating the bone realigning, and the fur regrowing, as if the injury had never existed, the wound aging backward to its pre-injury state in a soft glow that lit the glade like captured starlight. The deer stilled its breathing, steadying as it lifted its head to meet her gaze with wide wondering eyes, and Lisal felt the gift surge fully within her soul, a profound connection to the flow of time that made her tremble, not from fear, but from the overwhelming wonder that washed over her like a warm tide chasing away the chill of isolation. This was her hidden power, the ability to reverse wounds with nothing but her presence, the strange, shimmering sensation that returned flesh and bone to wholeness in ways no healer had ever seen. Her inner thoughts soared with cinematic clarity, the journey from banished strange one to this hidden moment unfolding in radiant waves, proving that the powerless could undo what the strong could only fear. I am not cursed, she realized, the empowering realization blooming like dawn after the darkest night. My touch does not destroy, it restores time itself, bending backward to heal what was broken, and the kingdom that called me strange now needs this gift more than they know. Tears of profound emotion traced her cheeks as she whispered soft words to the deer, her voice carrying the quiet depth of one who had been labeled too strange for too long. You are whole again, little one, she murmured, her tone laced with emotional truth, the poetic resonance of her gift blending with the forest's gentle rustle. Go now, and remember that even the wounded can rise stronger than before. The deer rose unsteadily at first, then bounded away into the trees, its leg perfect and strong, leaving only faint prints in the moss as proof of the miracle. Lisal sat back on her heels, her hands still tingling with the strange backward time energy, the glade around her seeming to breathe in response, the leaves whispering, as if the wild itself approved the power she had hidden for so long. The mate bond stirred sharper in her chest, a warm resonant pull toward the distant palace where she sensed without seeing the first shadows of danger approaching the king, yet she remained rooted in all, letting the gift settle within her like a quiet river, waiting for the moment it would prove that the invisible healer could save what the mighty could not. Yet as the last light faded and stars began to emerge overhead, a low rumble echoed from the forest edge, not from the trees, but from the distant sound of riders approaching faster than before, their horses' hooves carrying the scent of urgency and steel. Lisal froze, her breath catching in her throat as a fleeting vision flashed across her mind, the Alpha King's figure riding alone into the wilderness, his powerful frame tense with pain from a wound that deepened with every passing hour, the cursed blade's curse spreading like shadows across his arm. The mate bond pulled sharper now, the call of his need mixing with the distant sound of the approaching patrol, and she knew the kingdom that had cast her out now teetered on the edge of ruin. Only her strange gift capable of saving the man who had once called her too strange. The Alpha riders drew closer, their voices carrying on the wind, and Lisal slipped back toward the shadows of the camp, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and unexpected hope as the mini cliffhanger of pursuit hung in the forest air like the first distant rumble of a storm that could change everything, leaving her suspended between the safety of hiding and the pull of a destiny only her reversal could fulfill. The first light of dawn crept through the forest canopy like hesitant fingers of gold brushing the moss-covered ground as Lisal slipped back into the hidden camp, her heart still racing from the vision of the king's cursed wound that had flashed across her mind in the glade. She moved quietly past the sleeping outcasts, her bare feet silent on the damp earth, while the distant sound of Alpha riders grew louder, their horses' hooves thudding like warnings through the trees. The air carried the sharp scent of pine, and dew mingled with the faint metallic tang of fear that clung to her skin after the deer's reversal, the strange backward time sensation still tingling in her fingertips like a secret she could no longer hide. In her inner thoughts, the humiliation from the medical tents replayed like an unrelenting current, pulling her back to that fateful day when everything had shattered. She had only meant to help one soldier whose deep gash refused to close, but the moment her hand hovered near the wound, the injury had begun to reverse, the torn flesh knitting backward with that shimmering glow returning perfectly to unmarked skin. Gasps had rippled through the tent, followed by shouts of dark magic, and the lead physician had pointed at her with trembling fury. "This Omega is cursed," he had cried. "Wounds do not heal like this, they age backward, as if time itself bends to her touch. She is too strange to remain among us." King Davil's eyes had locked onto hers for one fleeting second, and in that heartbeat Lisal had felt the faint warm pull of the mate bond stirring between them like a hidden current beneath still water. But his gaze had hardened into ice, and his voice had rung out across the tent's cold and final. "Banish this strange girl from the medical corps and from the palace grounds. Her presence brings only unnatural fear, and we have no room for such weakness beside a king." The flashback faded, leaving Lisal trembling slightly as she sank down beside the small fire where Mira, the kind elder Omega, stirred a pot of herbal broth, her weathered face etched with quiet concern under the rising sun that painted the trees in warm hues. "Child, you look as though the ghosts of the past have found you again," Mira said, her voice warm and steady like the gentle flow of a hidden stream, as she ladled broth into a wooden bowl and pressed it into Lisal's hand. "The Alphas rode out early this morning, speaking of a royal hunt, and rumors from the palace speak of the king himself riding into the wild with a wound that deepens by the hour. They call it a curse, and the patrols search for the strange healer they banished." Lisal wrapped her fingers around the warm bowl, the steam rising like soft whispers from the deep as she met the elder's gaze, the emotional weight of the night pressing on her words, yet she kept her voice soft with the empowering resolve that had begun to bloom since the gift had fully awakened. "Mira, I cannot hide what happened in the glade," she replied, her tone carrying the poetic depth of one who had touched time itself. "I reversed the deer's wound completely, the flesh aged backward to wholeness with that strange, shimmering sensation, and now I feel the king's pain calling to me through the bond. The power they labeled dark magic is not a curse, it is a gift that undoes what should not be, and if I stay silent, the man who banished me will die from the very wound only I can reverse." Myra's expression softened with understanding, but also with a mother's fear as she glanced toward the forest edge where the distant riders' voices carried faintly on the wind. "I remember the day they dragged you from the tents," she whispered, her hand resting gently on Lisal's shoulder, the touch offering comfort like a warm current in cold seas. "They mocked you for the way wounds closed around you, calling it unnatural and strange, while the king stood by and let them label you dangerous. The Alphas fear what they cannot control, and if you reveal this gift they will hunt you not as a healer, but as a threat to the throne that already cast you out. Stay hidden, my dear, for your own safety. The kingdom has survived without your strange touch before." Lisal took a steadying breath, letting the broth's warmth fill her, while her inner thoughts surged with empowering clarity. The flashback's pain now blending with the wonder of her gift, transforming fear into something fiercer. Myra's words echoed the lessons of her trauma, yet deep down Lisal knew remaining silent would only let the curse claim the king and doom the realm. The mate bonds pull mixing with the distant sound of hooves, as if both called her to act. "I understand your worry, Mira," she said, her voice gaining emotional strength that rose like a tide of quiet courage. But if I remain invisible, who will reverse the wound that deepens on the man who once called me too strange? The dialogue hung between them heavy with unspoken possibilities as another low rumble echoed from the forest edge, this one carrying the clear sound of riders drawing nearer, their voices sharp with orders to search every glade. Mira squeezed Lisal's hand, her eyes filled with a mix of pride and sorrow. "You have always carried a light brighter than they deserve," she murmured, "but promise me you will be careful. The bond may call, but it does not guarantee the king will listen this time." Lisal nodded, though inside her the cinematic vision of the king's pained figure and the cursed blade flashing once more filled her with urgent dread. The kingdom that had cast her out now teetered on the edge of loss, and only her strange gift, the one they had labeled dark magic, could bridge the gap between past trauma and a future she alone might shape. As the Alpha riders appeared on the ridge, their horses kicking up leaves, and the distant sound of the king's solitary ride echoed through the bond, Lisal felt the pull intensify, like an invisible thread drawing her back toward the man who had once banished her, leaving her heart suspended between the safety of the wild and the uncertain path that awaited her there. The distant rumble of hooves echoed through the forest like thunder rolling across the canopy as Lisal stood frozen at the edge of the camp, her heart slamming against her ribs with the sudden sharp pull of the mate bond that surged through her like a tidal wave of urgency. She could feel it, the king's pain flaring across the bond, not as a vision, but as a deep knowing. The Alpha King Davil had been struck by an ancient cursed blade in the palace halls, the wound already deepening with every passing hour, spreading shadows across his arm like ink bleeding through parchment. The physicians had confirmed it, only backward time healing could stop the curse, the kind that reversed flesh and bone to its pre-injury state, the very gift they had labeled strange and banished her for. In her inner thoughts the empowering surge rose like a tide, washing away the last fragments of doubt from her exile. This was the moment the forest had prepared her for the call she could no longer ignore, because her strange power, the one that made wounds age backward in shimmering waves, was now the only hope for the man who had once called her too strange to remain. She had run from the medical tents into the wild, hiding the gift that reversed injuries with nothing but her presence, yet the mate bond refused to let her stay invisible any longer, pulling her toward the palace with a force that made her breath catch and her legs move before her mind could protest. Mira appeared at her side, the elder Omega's face pale with worry, her hands clutching a woven satchel of herbs that spilled slightly as another distant hoofbeat shook the leaves overhead. "Child, the riders are searching for the strange healer they banished," Mira said, her voice low and urgent. "You must not go toward the palace. They called you cursed once, and they will hunt you as a threat again." Lisal turned to her friend, the cinematic sweep of the misty forest framing their conversation like a painting of quiet courage amid gathering storm clouds, the morning light dancing on the leaves in shades of gold and silver, while distant birds cried overhead as if carrying warnings from the deep. "Mira, I feel it stronger now," she replied, her tone steady, yet laced with the poetic depth of one who had touched time itself. "The king has been wounded by a blade that deepens with every hour, and the bond pulls me back because my gift is the only thing that can reverse it. I reversed the deer's leg completely, the flesh aged backward to wholeness, and now the sea of time inside me whispers that the same power can save him." The elder searched her eyes for a long moment, then sighed with reluctant understanding, pressing the satchel into Lisal's hands. "Then take my blessing, and these herbs for strength on the road," she said, her words warm and protective like a gentle current in cold seas. "But promise you will guard your heart against the king's pride. The bond may call, but it does not guarantee kindness from the man who once stood by while they labeled you strange." Lisal embraced her tightly, the warmth of their chosen family bond stronger than any bloodline, offering a fleeting comfort before she pulled away, her steps quickening along the narrow path that led away from the camp toward the winding trails that would take her back to the capital. The wind whipped her hair, and the forest seemed to breathe around her, the trees parting slightly as If the wild itself approved the journey, her inner voice growing louder and more confident with every stride. This is my moment, she thought, the empowering realization chasing away the shadows of childhood loss and public rejection. The powerless Omega they called strange now carries the voice that can undo what the strong cannot. And if time bends to me again, it will prove that fear transformed becomes the greatest strength. The path wound upward through thickening woods where sunlight dappled the leaves in golden pattern, that danced like the shimmering glow of her gift, and she paused only once at a small stream to drink and steady her breathing. There in the reflective water she caught her own gaze and saw not the broken girl from the medical tents, but a woman whose eyes held the quiet fire of destiny. Continuing onward, she felt the mate bond sharpen, a warm resonant pull that connected her directly to the palace where King Davil lay in his chambers, his powerful frame rigid against the curse, while his guards shouted reports of the wounds spreading faster than any healer could stop. She could not see through his eyes, but the threat allowed her to sense the urgency, the way the curse deepened with every heartbeat, threatening to claim his life before the day ended. Without words, she knew he faced the danger alone, his pride still shielding him from admitting the mistake that had banished the very soul capable of helping. Her courage surged like the forest wind itself, and she lifted her voice in a distant whisper, the strange power flowing from her like liquid starlight, smooth and resonant, filling the air with a melodic force that cut through the trees. The words were not shouted, but woven with emotional depth, each syllable a tender plea for balance, a harmonious reversal that painted cinematic visions in her mind of the king's wound shimmering and aging backward, the shadows retreating, the flesh knitting to wholeness. She spoke of restoration and time flowing in reverse, her voice carrying the poetic beauty of forgotten tides that had once guarded the realm, and as the phrases built in power, she felt the curse respond. Far away in the capital, the wound that had threatened to swallow the king's strength eased its violence, spread, the shadows glowing faintly before beginning to recede with a soft sigh of ancient harmony. Lisal's inner thoughts filled with awe and quiet triumph. See, she told herself, the empowerment blooming within her like a flower after long winter. My gift reaches where armies and physicians cannot. The powerless one they rejected now steadies the king from afar, proving that true strength lies not in alpha command, but in the quiet reversal of what was once dismissed. The forest seemed to listen to the leaves rustling softly, as if the wild itself bowed to the power flowing through her. Yet the mate bond deepened in that instant, sending a rush of warmth through her veins, a subtle echo of the king's surprise and confusion that brushed against her spirit like a hesitant caress. She wondered if he felt her presence now, if the faint pull he had ignored in the tents now tugged at him with undeniable force, making him question the arrogance that had led to her banishment. No dialogue passed between them across the distance, but the emotional connection spoke volumes, her courage feeding into the bond, while his growing uncertainty whispered back through the thread. She continued her whisper, her feet moving forward again through the wild paths where flooded streams reflected the sunlight like shattered mirrors of the world's fragility. Hours blurred into a rhythmic journey of voice and step, the words never ceasing as she intervened. From afar, slowing the curse's spread and buying precious time for the king she had once fled. The power poured from her with increasing fluidity, each phrase laced with the rich imagery of protective light weaving through time and calming the restless wound before it could fully claim him. Her body grew weary from the travel and the emotional expenditure, yet her spirit soared with every successful pulse of response from the gift. This is my redemption, she thought, the inner voice strong and unwavering. Not through the king's favor, but through the strange power that transforms my silence into salvation. The landscape shifted from deep woods to the forested outskirts of the capital, the trees providing brief shelter as she pressed on, her clothes damp with dew, but her resolve unbreakable. In a small clearing she paused again to catch her breath, the mate bond now humming like a living melody in her chest, pulling her toward the palace gates visible in the distance through the thinning trees. She sensed the king's figure more clearly, now his guards in full panic around him as the curse tested the reversal she had just offered, and she knew her distant intervention would no longer suffice. The true confrontation awaited within the walls, where the Alpha King would soon confront the mistake that had sent her away. Exhaustion weighed on her like chains of shadow, yet she whispered one final reversal: the curse.
Welcome back to our channel. Today Mott V brought you a brand new and incredibly captivating story, sure to please you if we watch the whole video. This story is entirely fictional. The video was created using artificial intelligence AI and is designed to provide positive entertainment and educational value to viewers aged Muiba and up. Now let us continue exploring today's story.
Easing further as the bond flared with urgent intensity, and as she approached the outer forest edge, a massive new surge of pain echoed from the king, the cursed blade fighting back with renewed force. The riders drew closer, their voices sharp on the wind, and Lisal knew the journey back had only begun, leaving her heart suspended on the edge of revelation as the palace spires came into view under the morning sky. The wild forest closed around Lisal like a living labyrinth of ancient trees and tangled vines as she pushed forward along the narrow trail, her breath coming in steady gasps while the mate bond tugged at her chest with relentless force, like an invisible current pulling her toward the palace she had once fled in shame. Rain from the earlier storm still dripped from the canopy above, turning the mossy ground into a slick mirror that reflected fractured images of her determined face, the cinematic sweep of the woods, alive with shifting shadows and the distant call of birds that seemed to urge her onward. Each step splashed through puddles carrying the sharp scent of pine and damp earth, yet she did not falter, the strange power of her gift humming within her veins like a quiet river waiting to flow. Her inner thoughts swirled in a poetic dance of hesitation and courage, the voice of doubt whispering reminders of the public rejection in the medical tents, the king's cold dismissal calling her to strange and banishing her without a second glance, ignoring the faint pull of the mate bond that had stirred between them in that fateful moment. Why return to the place that cast her out, she wondered, her mind heavy with the weight of past trauma and the childhood loss that still echoed like distant thunder. What if her gift failed? What if the nobles laughed again, reducing her strange reversal to the delusions of a banished Omega? Yet beneath the fear burned a fiercer flame, the empowering realization that her touch, the one they had labeled dark magic, now held the power to undo the cursed blade that threatened the king, and the bond's call felt like a quiet promise that her journey from powerless to purposeful was unfolding exactly as destiny intended. Thunder rolled across the canopy, shaking the branches in harmony with the deeper surges of the king's pain, and Lisal paused beneath a cluster of storm-lashed oaks, her breath coming in steady gasps as she closed her eyes to focus. The rain streamed down her cheeks like tears of the forest, washing away the last traces of hesitation, and in that moment she felt the bond sharpen, a warm, resonant pull that connected her directly to the palace chambers where King Davil lay, his powerful frame rigid against the curse, while his guards shouted frantic reports. She could not see through his eyes, but the threat allowed her to sense the urgency, the way the wound deepened with every heartbeat, threatening to claim his life before the day ended. Without words, she knew he faced the danger alone, his pride still shielding him from admitting the mistake that had banished the very soul capable of helping. Her courage surged like the forest wind itself, and she lifted her voice in a distant whisper, the strange power flowing from her like liquid starlight, smooth and resonant, filling the air with a melodic force that cut through the trees. The words were not shouted, but woven with emotional depth, each syllable a tender plea for balance, a harmonious reversal that painted cinematic visions in her mind of the king's wound shimmering and aging backward, the shadows retreating, the flesh knitting to wholeness. She spoke of restoration and time flowing in reverse, her voice carrying the poetic beauty of forgotten tides that had once guarded the realm, and as the phrases built in power, she felt the curse respond. Far away in the capital, the wound that had threatened to swallow the king's strength eased its violence, spread, the shadows glowing faintly before beginning to recede with a soft sigh of ancient harmony. Lisal's inner thoughts filled with awe and quiet triumph. See, she told herself, the empowerment blooming within her like a flower after long winter. My gift reaches where armies and physicians cannot. The powerless one they rejected now steadies the king from afar, proving that true strength lies not in alpha command, but in the quiet reversal of what was once dismissed. The forest seemed to listen to the leaves rustling softly, as if the wild itself bowed to the power flowing through her. Yet the mate bond deepened in that instant, sending a rush of warmth through her veins, a subtle echo of the king's surprise and confusion that brushed against her spirit like a hesitant caress. She wondered if he felt her presence now, if the faint pull he had ignored in the tents now tugged at him with undeniable force, making him question the arrogance that had led to her banishment. No dialogue passed between them across the distance, but the emotional connection spoke volumes, her courage feeding into the bond, while his growing uncertainty whispered back through the thread. She continued her whisper, her feet moving forward again through the wild paths where flooded streams reflected the sunlight like shattered mirrors of the world's fragility. Hours blurred into a rhythmic journey of voice, and stepped the words never ceasing as she intervened. From afar, slowing the curse's spread and buying precious time for the king she had once fled. The power poured from her with increasing fluidity, each phrase laced with the rich imagery of protective light weaving through time and calming the restless wound before it could fully claim him. Her body grew weary from the travel and the emotional expenditure, yet her spirit soared with every successful pulse of response from the gift. This is my redemption, she thought, the inner voice strong and unwavering. Not through the king's favor, but through the strange power that transforms my silence into salvation. The landscape shifted from deep woods to the forested outskirts of the capital, the trees providing brief shelter as she pressed on, her clothes damp with dew, but her resolve unbreakable. In a small clearing she paused again to catch her breath, the mate bond now humming like a living melody in her chest, pulling her toward the palace gates visible in the distance through the thinning trees. She sensed the king's figure more clearly, now his guards in full panic around him as the curse tested the reversal she had just offered, and she knew her distant intervention would no longer suffice. The true confrontation awaited within the walls, where the Alpha King would soon confront the mistake that had sent her away. Exhaustion weighed on her like chains of shadow, yet she whispered one final reversal, the curse easing further as the bond flared with urgent intensity, and as she approached the outer forest edge, a massive new surge of pain echoed from the king, the cursed blade fighting back with renewed force. The riders drew closer, their voices sharp on the wind, and Lisal knew the journey back had only begun, leaving her heart suspended on the edge of revelation as the palace spires came into view under the morning sky. The forest edge gave way to open meadows like a curtain lifting on the final act as Lisal staggered. The last few steps, her legs heavy with exhaustion from the relentless trek through storm-lashed woods, yet her spirit burned brighter than ever with the empowering fire of purpose that had carried her from exile. The mate bond thrummed with urgent warmth, pulling her forward even as fatigue threatened to buckle her knees. She dropped to one knee at the trailing, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she gazed across the open fields toward the palace where the Alpha King Davil lay in his chambers, the cursed blade's wound deepening with every passing hour. In her inner thoughts, the journey from the hidden glade replayed like a tide of quiet triumph, the distant reversals she had sent ahead already easing the curse's spread, proving that her strange gift answered even from afar. Yet the sight of the palace spires rising against the stormy sky sent a fresh wave of determination surging through her. This was the first true glimpse of the catastrophe. She had come to face the king's life hanging by a thread from the ancient curse that no physician could stop, and she knew her distant whispers had only bought precious moments, the power within her now calling for her touch to rise closer to the heart of the danger. Guards on the outer ramparts spotted her, then their alpha postures stiffening with suspicion as one stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of his sword. Who approaches the forest edge in such disarray? He demanded, his voice rough with alarm carried on the wind. The strange healer from the tents, another added with a sneer. Turn back before the curse claims you too. Lisal lifted her head, meeting their gazes, without flinching, her breath steady despite the weariness that made her limbs tremble. "I am no stranger to these walls," she replied, her tone soft, yet carrying the resonant echo of her gift that lingered from her journey. "The curse deepens on your king, and only my touch can reverse what spread. Let me through for the king's sake and the kingdom's." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, the panic from the deepening wound still rippling through them, as another shout echoed from the palace balcony, sending sprays of urgent voices high into the air. In that instant, Lisal did not wait for permission, her power rising in a distant reversal that flowed from her like a gentle yet unbreakable current of ancient harmony. The strange shimmering sensation spread through the air like liquid starlight reaching across the fields and deeper still toward the king's chamber. She focused the reversal on the cursed wound, painting inner visions of the blade's damage aging. Backward the shadows, retreating the flesh, knitting to wholeness with perfect precision. The curse responded almost immediately, the wound easing its violent advance, the deepening shadows glowing faintly before beginning to recede with a soft sigh of ancient harmony. The guards fell silent, their panic easing into stunned awe as they watched the king's distant balcony, where frantic activity suddenly calmed, the curse's grip loosening for the first critical moment. She could feel the king's presence sharpen through the bond, now a fleeting brush of his awareness, like a warm shadow crossing her mind, sensing her arrival and the subtle intervention that had slowed the blade's deadly march. Though she remained in her own perspective, the emotional thread carried his surprise and the first stirrings of something deeper, a hesitant recognition that the Omega he had banished now steadied the very life he fought to keep. Lisal's inner thoughts swelled with quiet triumph mixed with lingering vulnerability. See, she affirmed to herself, the empowering journey from invisible exile to guardian unfolding in every shimmering reversal. My gift turns mockery into salvation, proving that the voiceless hold the key to what the powerful overlook. The mate bond hummed stronger in response, as if acknowledging her courage, and she drew a shaky breath, pushing through the exhaustion that clouded her vision. The curse had slowed, but not broken, its shadows still lurking on the king's arm as the physicians shouted reports of the temporary relief. She rose slowly, her body protesting every movement, yet her resolve unbreakable as the guards finally parted, allowing her passage along the meadow path with wary nods. One even offered a steadying hand, which she accepted with a grateful nod, her emotional dialogue brief but heartfelt. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice still laced with the ancient melody. "The threat is not over, but together we may yet turn it back." The Alpha who had challenged her earlier cleared his throat, his tone softened by what he had witnessed. "If you speak truth, healer, then the king must know of your return," he said, leading her forward along the stabilized trail. Lisal nodded, though her heart ached with the weight of what lay ahead, the slow burn pull of destiny, drawing her closer to the man whose rejection had started this path. The cinematic sweep of the capital unfolded around her, towers and spires now marred by storm and urgency, yet standing resilient thanks to her distant efforts. And as they approached the inner palace walls, a deeper rumble echoed from the king's chambers, the cursed blade fighting back with renewed force. She sensed the king there, his guards in full panic around him as the wound tested the reversal she had just offered, and she knew her distant intervention would no longer suffice. The true confrontation awaited within the walls, where the Alpha King would soon confront the mistake that had sent her away. Exhaustion weighed on her like chains of shadow, yet she focused one final reversal, the curse easing further as the bond flared with urgent intensity. And as she crossed the palace threshold, a massive new surge of pain echoed from the king, the cursed blade threatening to overwhelm the temporary calm. The guards drew closer, their voices sharp on the wind, and Lisal knew the journey back had reached its edge, leaving her heart suspended on the edge of revelation as the royal chambers came into full view under the stormy sky. The grand royal chambers glowed under the soft light of crystal lanterns, their golden beams catching on the heavy velvet drapes that framed the massive bed where King Davil lay propped against pillows, his powerful frame tense with the cursed blade's shadow spreading across his arm like ink bleeding through parchment. Lisal stood at the threshold, her simple exile cloak still damp from the forest trek, her heart pounding with the weight of every step that had brought her back to the place that had once cast her out. The air carried the metallic tang of blood, and burning herbs mingled with the faint shimmer of her gift that still lingered on her skin like a secret the world had tried to silence. She moved forward, her footsteps soft on the polished stone, the mate bond humming between them like a living current that refused to let her turn away. In her inner thoughts, the journey from the hidden glade replayed like a tide of quiet triumph, the distant reversals she had sent ahead already easing the curses spread, proving that her strained power answered even from afar. Yet the sight of the king lying wounded sent a fresh wave of cautious hope surging through her. This was the first true glimpse of the man behind the crown, the Alpha King, who had called her to. Strange now, lying vulnerable in the very chambers where he had once banished her, and she knew her gift, the one that made wounds age backward in shimmering waves, was now the only hope for the life she had once fled. Guards stepped back, their alpha postures stiff with suspicion, but they parted at the king's weak gesture, leaving the two of them alone in the vast space where torchlight danced across ancient tapestries depicting battles long won. Davil's eyes locked onto hers, and time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to the sight of the Omega he had exiled standing before him, storm-kissed and resolute. For the first time since the medical tense, the Alpha King allowed his perspective to shift inward, the shock hitting him like a physical wave that cracked the armor of his pride. There she was, the woman whose presence had once stirred the faint mate bond he had dismissed as weakness, now returned from the wilderness, her hands carrying the very power he had labeled strange and dangerous. Guilt flooded him, a deep internal wave that twisted in his chest as he recalled the tense his own voice declaring her too strange and ordering her exile, all because he had convinced himself a true king needed control and certainty rather than the unexplained reversal of time that made wounds heal backward. How blind I was, he thought, the regret blooming like thorns in his mind, the bond's thread now blazing with clarity, showing him the error of his arrogance, the way he had ignored destiny's call and sent away the one soul whose gift might save him from the cursed blade now eating away at his strength. His powerful frame remained outwardly composed, but inside the emotional storm raged fierce and unyielding, forcing him to confront the mistake that now threatened everything he ruled. Lisal felt the shift in him through their connection, though she remained in her own perspective, her inner voice steady with cautious hope. The king who had humiliated her now looked at her with something raw and unguarded, and it stirred emotions she had buried deep during her exile, the slow burn pull of the bond warming her despite the fear of renewed rejection. She stepped closer, her footsteps echoing softly amid the low rumble of the curse, the cinematic light from the lanterns casting long shadows that mirrored the depth of their shared history, the place of rejection now becoming a sanctuary for revelation. Davil's voice, when it came, was lower than she remembered, laced with a hesitation that revealed the depth of his internal regret. He began, his tone carrying the weight of unspoken questions as he struggled to sit up, the cursed arm trembling with effort. The strange healer from the tents, the one I sent away. Why have you returned now, when this blade deepens with every breath, and my physician confirm only your touch can turn it back? Lisal met his gaze, her heart aching with the cinematic beauty of the moment, lantern light dancing across his features, highlighting the flicker of guilt in his eyes that mirrored her own past pain. I returned because the bond called to me, your majesty, she replied, her words soft yet resonant with emotional truth, the strange power of her gift subtly weaving into her presence like a gentle undercurrent. The curse you and your nobles dismissed as distant threat now spreads, and only my reversal can undo what spreads. You banished me for being too strange, but that same strangeness is the only thing that can age the wound backward to wholeness. The dialogue hung between them, tentative and charged, as Davil took a shaky breath, his powerful presence tempered by the regret that now softened his stance. I see you now, he said, his voice deepening with genuine remorse, the inner switch revealing layers of self-doubt he had never allowed before. In the tents that day I laughed with the physicians, convinced your gift made you dangerous, a distraction unworthy of a king's attention. The mate bond stirred even then, but I rejected it, believing strength lay only in what the world could see. That was my mistake, Lisal, and it may cost me everything. Her inner thoughts surged with empowering clarity, the king's admission like a balm on old wounds, yet she guarded her heart, knowing the slow burn romance demanded time and proof. She had come not for his favor, but for the kingdom's survival, and his words, though heartfelt, still carried the echo of past authority. I do not seek revenge, she answered, her tone laced with quiet strength and the poetic depth of one who had risen from silence. Only the chance to use what the forest has shown me to protect what we both love. The bond between us may have been ignored, but it led me here through wild and whisper. Davil nodded, his regret deepening in the private space of his mind, where he grappled with the full weight of his error, the Alpha King humbled by the Omega's quiet power. Yet even as the emotional exchange built a fragile bridge between them, a violent new surge shook the King's arm, the cursed blade fighting back with renewed force, sending fresh shadows racing across his skin, and Lisal felt the gift within her stir urgently, the reversal she had offered from afar now challenged by the blade's final desperate grasp, leaving the air thick with unspoken promises and the urgent need for her touch to rise once more before the curse could claim him completely. The private garden balcony overlooked the wild forest edge, like a hidden sanctuary carved from stone, and moonlight where lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting soft golden pools across blooming night flowers that released their sweet salt-tinged scent into the air. Lisal stood beside King Davil, the mate bond humming between them like a living current that refused to let either turn away, while the distant rumble of the cursed blade's lingering pain still echoed faintly through their connection. The king had insisted they step outside the chambers for air, his powerful frame leaning against the carved railing as the cool night wind ruffled his dark hair and eased the tension in his shoulders. Her inner thoughts flowed like a careful tide. The demonstration she had just offered in the chamber had opened a door, yet she guarded her heart, remembering how quickly pride could slam it shut again. Still in this shared space, overlooking the forest, the slow burn intimacy felt real and earned each exchanged glance a step closer to trust earned through wild and whisper. Davil shifted closer, his hand resting near hers on the railing, without touching, as if afraid to break the delicate harmony building between them. These gardens have seen more than battles, he murmured, his voice low and thoughtful, carrying the weight of partial fault he had begun to voice in the chambers. I stood in the medical tents that day, convinced your gift made you dangerous, unworthy of standing beside a king. That was only part of my mistake, Lisal. I failed to see that true power often hides in the quiet places where strange reversals like yours have always waited to be understood. Lisal felt the words settle over her like a warm current, the cinematic beauty of the scene wrapping around them, both the moonlight dancing across the forest canopy in silver ribbons, while the faint shimmer of her gift still lingered on her skin like a secret the world had tried to silence. Her heart stirred with empowering warmth, the invisible Omega now standing as an equal at the king's side, her gift no longer mocked but sought. Yet she tempered the hope with the wisdom of her journey, knowing that worth could not be granted by any alpha, it had to be claimed from within. I never sought your validation, your majesty, she replied, her tone soft yet resonant with emotional depth, the strange power of her reversal blending naturally with the night air. All those nights in the wild when the world saw me as nothing, I touched the wounded and time flowed backward. My worth was never in your tents or your court. It lived in the reversal that chose me, the one that turns broken into whole. She stepped closer to a small potted rose bush where a thorn had left a fresh cut on the king. Finger from earlier when he had brushed against it in haste, the wound small but still bleeding. The mate bond responded with a deeper pulse, sending a shared warmth through them both as she lifted her hands and hovered them above the cut without touching. Davil watched in silence, his breath catching as the strange shimmering sensation awakened the injury, beginning to reverse the torn skin, aging backward with perfect precision, the blood retreating, the flesh knitting together until the cut vanished completely, as if it had never existed. His growing respect shone through like moonlight piercing clouds, the Alpha King humbled by the quiet miracle that unfolded before his eyes. Lisal felt his gaze like a warm current through the mate bond, strengthening the slow burn connection. Without words, yet her inner thoughts remained cautiously hopeful. He sees me now not as the strange one, but as the voice that can mend what was broken. Still she held part of her heart in reserve, knowing that true partnership required more than awe, it demanded time and shared purpose. As the final shimmer faded, the rose bush stood untouched, the king's finger whole and unmarked. She turned to meet his eyes, the emotional dialogue building between them like the gentle unfolding of dawn after a long night. "It is not force of magic, your majesty," she said, her voice soft with empowering truth, yet laced with the cinematic depth of her journey. "It is reversal. Time bends in balance, and I have carried its language not because I sought power, but because it chose the one who was invisible enough to listen." Davil stepped closer, the garden's quiet enveloping them in an intimate cocoon, his tone carrying genuine admiration that deepened the bond's pull. "I was wrong to call you strange in the tents," he admitted, the regret from earlier now layered with respect that made his words feel like a bridge being built stone by careful stone. "Your gift, Lisal, it does what my healers and generals cannot. It heals where I only commanded." In that moment his growing respect shone through like starlight on calm water, and Lisal guarded hope flickered brighter, though she tempered it with the wisdom of her past trauma. She had reversed the small cut, and now this private demonstration, but the cursed blade still loomed, and she knew their slow burn connection would be tested further. "Thank you for seeing it," she replied, her emotional words carrying the weight of every silenced year, now finding their voice. "But this is only the beginning. The greater curse calls louder, and I cannot face it alone." Davil nodded, his hand finally brushing hers in the lightest of touches, a spark of warmth that sent the mate bond singing through them both. "Then we face it together," he said, the promise in his voice sincere and steady. "You have shown me the error of my ways, and I will not repeat it." Lisal's inner thoughts swelled with quiet empowerment, the private moment in the garden transforming her from outcast to equal in his eyes. Yet as their fingers lingered, a sudden deeper surge echoed from the king's arm, the cursed blade fighting back with renewed force, the shadows racing across his skin once more. She felt the gift within her stir urgently, the reversal she had offered now challenged by the blade's final desperate grasp, leaving the air charged with fragile hope and the urgent whisper of impending crisis. The forest stream wound through the trees like a silver ribbon, catching the last rays of sunlight as Lisal and King Davil paused at its mossy bank, the water murmuring softly over smooth stones, while fireflies began to dance in the gathering dusk, painting the air with tiny sparks of living light. She knelt to fill a small waterskin, her hands steady despite the exhaustion that tugged at her limbs. The mate bond humming between them like a quiet tide that refused to let either pull away. The king lowered himself to a fallen log nearby, his powerful frame still tense from the curse blade's lingering shadow, yet his presence felt less like the commanding ruler who had banished her, and more like a man carrying the weight of his own mistakes. Her inner thoughts flowed like the stream itself, careful and steady. The small reversal she had offered in the garden had opened a door, yet she guarded her heart, remembering how quickly pride could slam it shut again. Still in this shared space, resting together by the water, the slow burn intimacy felt real and earned. Each exchanged glance a step closer to trust earned through wild and whisper. Davil watched her for a long moment, his hand resting near the stream's edge, as if drawing strength from the cool flow before he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful, carrying the weight of partial fault he had begun to voice earlier. "These woods have seen more than battles," he murmured, the cinematic beauty of the scene wrapping around them both, the fireflies weaving golden threads through the twilight, while the faint shimmer of her gift still lingered on her skin like a secret the world had tried to silence. "I stood in the medical tents that day, convinced your gift made you dangerous, unworthy of standing beside a king. That was only part of my mistake, Lisal." I failed to see that true power often hides in the quiet places where strange reversals like yours have always waited to be understood. Lisal felt the words settle over her like a warm current, her heart stirring with empowering warmth. The invisible Omega now resting as an equal beside the king, her gift no longer mocked but sought. Yet she tempered the hope with the wisdom of her journey, knowing that worth could not be granted by any alpha, it had to be claimed from within. I never sought your validation, your majesty, she replied, her tone soft yet resonant with emotional depth, the strange power of her reversal blending naturally with the stream's gentle murmur. All those nights in the wild when the world saw me as nothing, I touched the wounded and time flowed backward. My worth was never in your tents or your court. It lived in the reversal that chose me, the one that turns broken into whole. She reached out to a small cut on his palm from earlier, when he had gripped a thorny branch, in pain the wound small, but still bleeding. The mate bond responded with a deeper pulse, sending a shared warmth through them both as she hovered her hands above it without touching. Davil watched in silence, his breath catching, as the strange shimmering sensation awakened the injury. Beginning to reverse the torn skin, aging backward, with perfect precision, the blood retreating, the flesh knitting together until the cut vanished completely, as if it had never existed. His growing respect shone through like starlight on calm water, the Alpha King humbled by the quiet miracle that unfolded before his eyes. Lisal felt his gaze like a warm current through the mate bond, strengthening the slow burn connection. Without words, yet her inner thoughts remained cautiously hopeful. He sees me now not as the strange one, but as the voice that can mend what was broken. Still she held part of her heart in reserve, knowing that true partnership required more than awe, it demanded time and shared purpose. As the final shimmer faded, the king's palm stood untouched. She turned to meet his eyes, the emotional dialogue building between them like the gentle unfolding of dawn after a long night. It is not force of magic, your majesty, she said, her voice soft with empowering truth, yet laced with the cinematic depth of her journey. It is reversal. Time bends in balance, and I have carried its language not because I sought power, but because it chose the one who was invisible enough to listen. Davil leaned closer, the stream's quiet enveloping them in an intimate cocoon, his tone carrying genuine admiration that deepened the bond's pull. I was wrong to call you strange in the tents, he admitted, the regret from earlier now layered with respect that made his words feel like a bridge being built stone by careful stone. Your gift, Lisal, it does what my healers and generals cannot. It heals where I only commanded. In that moment his growing respect shone through like starlight on calm water, and Lisal guarded hope flickered brighter, though she tempered it with the wisdom of her past trauma. She had reversed the small cut, and now this private demonstration, but the cursed blade still loomed, and she knew their slow burn connection would be tested further. Thank you for seeing it, she replied, her emotional words carrying the weight of every silenced year, now finding their voice. But this is only the beginning. The greater curse calls louder, and I cannot face it alone. Davil nodded, his hand finally brushing hers in the lightest of touches, a spark of warmth that sent the mate bond singing through them both. Then we face it together, he said, the promise in his voice sincere and steady. You have shown me the error of my ways, and I will not repeat it. Lisal's inner thoughts swelled with quiet empowerment, the private moment by the stream transforming her from outcast to equal in his eyes. Yet as their fingers lingered, a sudden deeper surge echoed from the king's arm, the cursed blade fighting back with renewed force, the shadows racing across his skin once more. She felt the gift within her stir urgently, the reversal she had offered now challenged by the blade's final desperate grasp, leaving the air charged with fragile hope and the urgent whisper of impending crisis. The Grand Council Hall echoed with the sharp click of boots on polished marble as messengers from the outer courts burst through the heavy oak doors, their faces flushed with urgency and disdain. Under the flickering torchlight that cast long shadows across the vaulted ceiling, Lisal stood at King Davil's right hand, her simple forest cloak still damp from the stream's edge, contrasting sharply with the noble's ornate robes, yet she felt no shame, only the inner fire of purpose that had carried her through banishment and wild. The mate bond hummed warmly between them like a quiet tide anchoring her amid the gathering. Political storm, while the cursed blade's shadow still lingered on the king's arm, a faint reminder of the power only she could reverse. Her inner thoughts flowed with quiet strength the journey from hidden glade to this hall, transforming her from invisible healer to the one whose strange gift now held the kingdom's fragile hope. Yet she sensed the old hierarchies shifting against her like currents ready to pull her under once more. The lead messenger, a stern alpha noble named Lord Varen, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tense air like a blade honed by resentment. "Your Majesty, this Omega's return is an outrage," he declared, gesturing toward Lisal with a dismissive wave. "We banished her for being too strange around the wounded, and now you bring her into the heart of the palace while the cursed blade deepens on your arm. How can we trust one whose touch bends time in unnatural ways when soldiers once reported wounds?" Reversing as if dark magic itself flowed from her hands. Murmurs rippled through the nobles, some nodding in agreement, while others cast wary glances at the faint shimmering glow that still clung to Lisal's fingertips like starlight caught in skin. She felt the weight of their doubt like a physical wave pressing on her chest, yet her inner voice remained steady and empowering, reminding her that this storm of opposition was the very reason her gift had awakened, to give the voiceless a platform to be heard. Davil's jaw tightened, his defense beginning weakly as he raised a hand for silence, the alpha command in his tone tempered by the humility he had shown her by the stream. "The curse began before her return," he stated, his words measured, but lacking their usual force. "She has already slowed its spread with her reversal, and we must listen before we judge." Lord Varen scoffed, leaning forward with renewed venom. "Reversal, your Majesty, or treacherous folly? Omegas have no place meddling in the flow of time. If she claims to age wounds backward, then let her prove it here and now, or send her back to the wild, where she belongs before her presence dooms the throne entirely." The challenge hung heavy in the air, the emotional dialogue crackling with the tension of old hierarchies clashing against emerging truth. Lisal stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her posture unwavering, the cinematic light from the high windows streaming down like a spotlight on her quiet courage. She met the noble's gaze directly, her voice soft at first, yet carrying the resonant depth of her gift that began to weave into the room like a hidden melody. "I do not seek your approval," she began, the empowering tone lifting her from the shadows of past humiliation. "But I will show you what the reversal you once mocked can do, because the curse deepens with every moment we waste in doubt." She turned toward a ceremonial brazier at the chamber's center, where a small cut on a messenger's hand from an earlier fall still bled freely, the nobles leaning in, some with sneers, others with reluctant curiosity, as she lifted her hands and hovered them above the wound without touching. The strange shimmering sensation awakened the injury, beginning to reverse the torn skin, aging backward with perfect precision, the blood retreating, the flesh knitting together until the cut vanished completely, as if it had never existed, leaving the messenger staring at his unmarked palm in stunned silence. Gasps echoed through the assembly, Lord Varen stumbling back into his seat, his face draining of color as the truth humbled him before the entire court. Lisal's inner thoughts soared with triumphant clarity. Her gift had proven vital once more, transforming skepticism into awe and proving that the powerless could reshape the very forces the powerful had ignored. The mate bond flared warmly from Davil beside her, his weak defense now bolstered by visible proof, and she felt his respect deepen through their connection. Yet Lord Varen's face twisted with reluctant acknowledgement, while a few nobles exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves about Omegas rising above their station and the danger of trusting the strange one. Davil spoke, then his voice gaining strength as he stood taller beside her. "She has shown us the truth," he declared, his tone carrying more conviction now. "Lisal stays, and her counsel will be heard. The council will adapt, or the kingdom will fall." The emotional exchange rippled through the room, some faces softening with hope, while others hardened with resentment, and Lisal sensed the major political conflict brewing like a gathering storm, just beyond the chamber walls. As the meeting adjourned with murmurs of reluctant agreement, a second messenger burst in from the side doors, his face ashen with urgent news. "Your Majesty," he gasped, "the rival factions in the outer courts have rallied behind Lord Varen. They refuse to accept the strange healer at your side and threaten to challenge her presence with armed force before the full assembly at dawn, while the cursed blade stirs again in your arm, fighting every reversal she offers." Lisal felt the mate bond tighten with resolve, the political storm rising faster than the curse itself, leaving her heart suspended between the small victory in the brazier and the high-stake battle ahead, where her gift would either rewrite the kingdom's fate or face one last stand against those who clung to the old shadows of fear and dismissal. The council chamber emptied in a flurry of uneasy footsteps and whispered accusations, leaving Lisal and King Davil alone for a brief moment in the vaulted space where torchlights still flickered like hesitant stars. Her heart still raced from the demonstration at the brazier, the empowering rush of proving her gift, to the skeptical nobles lingering like a warm glow in her chest, yet she sensed the political storm had only begun to brew. The mate bond thrummed steadily between them, a quiet anchor amid the rising tension as Davil turned to her, his eyes reflecting the deeper respect they had built by the stream. "We have bought time with your reversal," he said, his tone carrying the emotional weight of their slow-burn connection. "But the nobles will not yield easily. Stay close, Lisal. I will not let them silence you again." She nodded, her inner thoughts swirling with cautious strength, the journey from hidden glade to this fragile place of influence feeling like a cinematic triumph painted in torchlight and ancient stone. Yet before she could reply, the heavy doors burst open, once more, this time admitting Lord Varen, a rival alpha noble known for his sharp ambition and close ties to the lead physician. His broad frame filled the entrance, his ornate robe swirling as he strode forward, flanked by two armed guards whose faces wore matching scowls of distrust. The air thickened with hostility, the cinematic shadows lengthening across the marble floor as Varen's voice cut through the chamber like a blade honed by resentment. "Your Majesty," he began, his tone laced with false deference that barely masked the venom. "This Omega's parlor tricks with shimmering time may fool the weak-minded, but I see the truth. She is no savior, she is the cause. Her presence has awakened the curse on your arm, and her so-called gift is nothing but forbidden sorcery meant to undermine your rule." He gestured sharply toward Lisal, his eyes narrowing with calculated disdain as the guards shifted closer, forming a subtle barrier that trapped her between the table and the wall. Lisal felt the betrayal unfold like a sudden storm cloud, the political conflict she had sensed now manifesting in open accusation. Her inner voice rose with empowering resolve, refusing to shrink into the invisibility of her past. "I have slowed what your physicians could not," she replied, her words soft yet resonant with the strange power of her reversal that began to weave through them like a protective melody. "The curse deepens because it has been ignored for too long, not because of me." Lord Varen laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling as he stepped even closer, his hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial dagger. "Then prove your innocence, Omega," he sneered. "Submit to a binding ritual under my supervision, or face the consequences of treason." The guards moved, then their ambush swift and coordinated, one seizing her arm, while the other drew a blade meant to intimidate rather than harm in the palace halls. Lisal's breath caught the cinematic chaos erupting around her as the mate bond flared hot with alarm, pulling her focus toward Davil. She did not panic, instead drawing on the ancient connection that lived in her blood, her hands rising instinctively as the strange shimmering sensation awakened in the air like liquid starlight. The reversal flowed from her in urgent waves, not as force but as harmony of time, each syllable painting vivid inner visions of glowing barriers weaving around the guards and Varen himself, calming their aggression and forcing the drawn blade to lower harmlessly to the floor. The rival Alpha's eyes widened in shock as the ambush crumbled, his guards stumbling back. With dazed expressions, the cursed blade's restless energy in the king's arm momentarily stilled by her gift's intervention, saving not only her own life, but preventing bloodshed that could have torn the council apart. In that instant, Davil's perspective shifted inward, the Alpha King's deeper regret surging like a tidal wave that crashed through his soul with merciless clarity. He watched Lisal stand tall, her reversal weaving salvation where his own commands had once failed. And the full weight of his initial mistake crushed him anew, the arrogance that had led him to banish her now exposed as the true betrayal. How could I have been so blind, he thought, the internal storm raging fierce and unrelenting, his pride shattering completely in the face of her courage. I rejected the bond, dismissed her as too strange, and now a rival seeks to destroy the very light I ignored. Guilt twisted deeper than before mingled with profound admiration that made the mate bond blaze between them like a beacon in the darkness. He stepped forward, his powerful presence reclaiming command as he placed himself between Lisal and Lord Varen, his voice thundering with newfound conviction. Enough, he declared, the regret fueling his resolve into unyielding protection. Lisal has saved us all while you plotted in shadows. Your ambition ends here, Varen, and any who stand against her will answer to me. The rival Alpha recoiled, his face flushing with humiliated fury, yet he retreated with his guards, the political betrayal laid bare but not defeated as whispers of further opposition lingered in the air. Lisal's inner thoughts swelled with quiet triumph, the ambush overcome, and her gift once more, proving vital, transforming the moment of danger into another step on her journey from powerless to powerful. The emotional dialogue that followed felt like a bridge strengthening between her and the king as he turned to her, his hand gently steadying her shoulder. You are safe, he said, his tone laced with the depth of his surfaced regret. And I swear on the bond that connects us, I will never fail you again. She met his gaze, her heart softening further with the slow burn warmth of earned trust. Yet the victory felt fleeting as a violent new surge shook the king's arm, the cursed blade fighting back with renewed force, the shadows racing across his skin, once more threatening to overwhelm the temporary calm she had woven. The air grew heavy with primordial energy, the mini cliffhanger hanging over them like an unfinished symphony as the kingdom teetered on the brink of true catastrophe, leaving her gift the only hope. Against the darkness now surging through the king's veins with unrelenting fury, the sacred forest glade opened before Lisal like a hidden cradle of the wild, its ancient trees forming a perfect circle around a moss-covered stone altar where faint shimmering light pulsed from the earth itself, as if time itself waited to be touched. She stepped into the clearing, her bare feet sinking into the soft moss while the mate bond pulled her forward with gentle insistence, the distant rumble of the cursed blade still echoing through her veins like a shadow that refused to fade. The air grew thick with pine and dew, the moonlight filtering through the canopy in silver shafts that danced across the altar like living runes calling her name. Her inner thoughts swirled with a storm of fear and courage, the childhood trauma of being labeled strange rising unbidden like a dark current threatening to pull her under even now. This was the high-stakes ritual, the ancient reversal rite that would awaken the full power of her gift, and she wondered if the forest that had sheltered her in exile would truly accept the Omega they had banished, or if her touch would falter at the edge of transformation. Davil walked close beside her, his powerful presence a protective shield, his hand hovering near her back without touching, as if afraid to break the fragile harmony building between them. Lisal, he said, his voice low and steady, laced with emotional sincerity that filled the glade like a gentle breeze. I stand with you not as the king who once banished you, but as the man who sees your light. This ritual will test you beyond anything we have faced, but I will guard you with my life. You have already transformed my blindness into belief, and whatever comes I will not leave your side. His words wrapped around her like a warm current, strengthening the slow burn bond that had grown through shared secrets and quiet trust. She turned to him briefly, her gaze meeting his in the flickering moonlight, the cinematic intimacy of the moment etching itself into her soul. Your protection means more than you know, your majesty, she replied, her tone soft yet resonant with the poetic depth of one who had claimed her worth. But this awakening must come from within me. Time bends in balance, and I trust it will guide us both to the light we need. They reached the altar's edge, the sacred stone cool beneath her palms as she knelt in the center of the glade, the earth humming beneath her knees with a deep resonant energy that mirrored the strange shimmering sensation of her gift. Davil stood at the glade's edge, watching with protective intensity, his frame tense, yet unwavering. The ritual began without hesitation, her hands pressing flat against the stone as the mate bond flared brighter, connecting her to him in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Her lips parted as the first words of the reversal chant flowed forth, rich and melodic each syllable, weaving through the glade like threads of starlit silk. The language resonated deeper than ever before, the altar igniting in soft shimmering light that climbed the surrounding trees, while the stone beneath her hands warmed with a gentle yet powerful surge. Lisal's voice grew stronger, the poetic incantation painting vivid inner visions of transformation, her omega essence stirring as if the ancient forest recognized her as its chosen vessel. The fear dissolved completely, replaced by a radiant empowerment that made her body glow faintly, the air around her shimmering with the promise of change. Davil watched in silence, his breath catching as the ritual reached its peak. In this vital moment, his perspective shifted inward, the Alpha King, soul flooding with a wave of redemption, so complete it nearly brought him to his knees. All the arrogance that had led him to call her strange in the tense, the cold dismissal that had banished the woman destiny had chosen for him, now stood fully exposed and forgiven in the light of her power. How wrong I was, he thought, the internal regret transforming into pure reverence, the mate bond blazing between them like a bridge of fire and starlight. I saw only weakness where strength beyond measure waited. She who I rejected has become the salvation I never deserved, and in her rising I find my own redemption, not as a flawless king, but as a man humbled and ready to love with open eyes. His heart swelled with awe at the sight of her glowing aura, the subtle light painting her features with quiet majesty, and he knew in that instant that his rule would never be the same. Lisal's chant softened to its closing note, the glade falling into a profound stillness broken only by the gentle hum of restored harmony. She rose slowly from the altar, her legs steady despite the exhaustion that tugged at her frame, the transformation complete in a way that left her feeling both changed and more herself than ever before. Davil crossed the space in 3 long strides, his hand reaching for hers with reverent care, the touch sending a warm surge through the mate bond that spoke of partnership earned through trial and truth. You have done what no one else could, he said, his voice thick with emotion carrying the depth of his full redemption. Your light, Lisal, it has reversed what I once let deepen through my blindness. I stand here not as your king, but as the man who sees you fully and vows to walk beside you as equal. She met his gaze, her own eyes shining with the poetic beauty of their shared moment, the slow burn romance deepening into something enduring and real. This power was never mine alone, she replied, her tone soft yet empowering, laced with the resonant echo of her gift. It belongs to every voice once silenced, and together we will ensure no one is banished for being strange again. The emotional dialogue wove between them like the final threads of the ritual, binding their fates in harmony. Yet as the last shimmering light dimmed to a peaceful glow, a new surge rippled through the king's arm, the cursed blade fighting back with renewed force far above in the palace hall. The true test awaited in the light of day, where the nobles and scholars would confront the transformed healer who now held the kingdom's future in her touch, and Lisal felt the mate bond pull them both upward toward the public confrontation that would either cement her legacy or ignite the final storm of opposition. The grand hall of the palace shimmered under the light of 1,000 crystal lanterns, their glow catching on the newly repaired marble floors where faint shimmering traces from the ritual still lingered like whispers of time itself, bending in quiet harmony. Nobles and scholars filled the long rows of gilded seats, their ornate robes rustling with uneasy whispers as Lisal stepped through the towering doors, her transformed aura glowing with that subtle inner light that made her simple yet elegant robes appear woven from starlit moss itself. As the entire court gathered in hushed awe, The mate bond hummed warmly between her and King Davil, who walked at her side, his powerful presence. No longer a shadow over her, but a steady pillar of shared strength, the slow burn romance between them now blooming openly like the first gentle rays after a long night of storm. Her inner thoughts flowed with cinematic clarity, painting the full arc of her journey from the rainy humiliation in the medical tents where nobles had laughed, and the king had banished her as too strange to the storm-lashed forest where her touch first reversed wounds, and the quiet nights when she had whispered her gift into the wild, now culminating in this legacy of light that lifted every powerless soul. I have risen, she realized with overwhelming empowerment, the invisible healer once mocked for her strange power now stepping into queenship, not through force, but through the reversal that had healed what pride had broken. Every mockery, every curse, every moment of doubt had led here, proving that the voiceless could claim their place and change the world with nothing but truth spoken through time. Davil guided her to the center dais, his hand brushing hers with reverent care, the gesture speaking louder than any decree as he raised his voice, first steady and resonant with the redemption that had reshaped his rule. "The kingdom has witnessed a curse that threatened to swallow me whole," he declared, addressing the gathered faces, some still etched with doubt, others softened by the reports of the reversed wound. "Yet it was not my command or the wisdom of our physicians that restored balance. It was Lisal the healer, once banished from these very halls, whose touch reversed time and turned the cursed blade back from my arm. She stands before you not as a stranger, but as the one destiny has chosen." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lord Varon, rising from his seat, his face flushed with lingering skepticism as he pointed an accusing finger toward her. "Your Majesty, this display of shimmering light and backward wounds may impress the fearful, but we cannot rewrite centuries of tradition for one Omega's claims." She was dismissed for good reason, her power deemed dangerous folly. How do we know her reversal has not merely delayed the end, rather than prevented it? The words struck like echoes of the medical tent's humiliation, yet Lisal felt only a calm fire within her spirit, rising unbowed. She stepped forward, her posture tall and unwavering, the cinematic light from the lanterns bathing her in a halo that made the faint shimmer on her hands pulse brighter, as if time itself listened. "I do not ask for your belief," she began, her voice soft at first, yet carrying the resonant depth of her gift that wove through her words like threads of unbreakable harmony. "I offer proof through the reversal. You once mocked the same power that answered my touch when the king lay dying." She turned toward a ceremonial brazier at the chamber's center, where a deep gash on a guard's arm from an earlier fall still bled freely, the nobles leaning in, some with sneers, others with reluctant curiosity, as she lifted her hands and hovered them above the wound without touching. The strange shimmering sensation awakened the injury, beginning to reverse the torn flesh, aging backward with perfect precision, the blood retreating, the skin knitting together until the gash vanished completely, as if it had never existed, leaving the guard staring at his unmarked arm in stunned silence. Gasps echoed through the assembly. Lord Varon stumbling back into his seat, his face draining of color as the truth humbled him before the entire court. Lisal's inner thoughts soared with triumphant clarity, the public stand transforming every silent year into a beacon that lit the path for others like her. See, she affirmed to herself, the empowering realization blooming like dawn after endless night. "My touch, once dismissed as strange, now command what their healers could not. From invisible to powerful, I rise not for revenge, but to ensure no healer is ever banished again for daring to bend time." The mate bond flared warmly from Davil beside her, his eyes filled with profound pride as he stepped forward, his hand finding hers in full view of the hall, the gesture sealing their slow burn romance in the eyes of the court. "She has proven her worth 1,000 times over," he said, his tone carrying the depth of his full redemption and the emotional dialogue that bound them closer. "I was wrong to reject her, to laugh when she first showed her gift. Lisal's reversal has not only saved me, it has shown us that true strength lies in the strange voices we once silenced. The kingdom will change, starting now with her place at my side as queen." Whispers turned to murmurs of reluctant agreement, some nobles nodding with newfound respect, while a few hardened faces still lingered in the shadows. Lisal met the eyes of the humbled nobles, her voice steady with quiet empowerment as she concluded. The demonstration, the shimmering light, fading gently back into the guard's arm. This is not the end of the old ways, she told them, her words laced with the poetic resonance that had won the hall. It is the beginning of balance, where every wolf, regardless of station, may touch the strange and be heard. The kingdom we build together will honor the different as equals, for it is they who often hold the light the mighty overlook. Davil squeezed her hand, the public affirmation sealing their bond, yet as the assembly began to applaud with growing enthusiasm, a messenger hurried in from the side doors, his face pale with urgent news. Your Majesty, he gasped, the rival factions in the outer courts have rallied behind Lord Varen. They refused to accept the strange queen and threatened to challenge the new laws before the full council at dawn, while the cursed blade stirs once more in the shadows of the palace. Lisal felt the mate bond tighten, with resolve the public confrontation won, but the final political storm gathering on the horizon, leaving her heart suspended between triumph and the high stakes battle ahead, where her gift would either rewrite the kingdom forever or face one last stand against those who clung to the old shadows of fear and dismissal. The grand coronation hall overflowed with the soft glow of morning sunlight streaming through towering arched windows that framed the wild forest like a living tapestry of renewal, where once shadowed paths now lay open and inviting under the reversed light of hope, and banners of silver and green fluttered gently in the breeze, carrying the faint scent of blooming night herbs from the sacred glade below. Lisal stood at the center of the dais, her transformed aura shimmering with that subtle inner light that made her elegant robes appear woven from starlit moss itself, as the entire court gathered in hushed awe. The mate bond hummed warmly between her and King Davil, who stood proudly at her side, his powerful presence no longer a shadow over her, but a steady pillar of shared strength, the slow burn romance between them now blooming openly like the first gentle rays after a long night of storm. Her inner thoughts flowed with cinematic clarity, painting the full arc of her journey from the rainy humiliation in the medical tents, where nobles had laughed and the king had banished her as too strange, to the storm-lashed forest, where her touch first reversed wounds, and the quiet nights when she had whispered her gift into the wild, now culminating in this legacy of light that lifted every powerless soul. I have risen, she realized with overwhelming empowerment, the invisible healer once mocked for her strange power, now stepping into queenship not through force, but through the reversal that had healed what pride had broken. Every mockery, every curse, every moment of doubt had led here, proving that the voiceless could claim their place and change the world with nothing but truth spoken through time. Davil lifted the crown of intertwined silver and emerald, his hands steady as he placed it upon her head, the metal cool against her brow, yet warming instantly to her skin, as if the forest itself blessed the union. You stand before us all as queen, he declared, his voice resonant and filled with the depth of his redemption, carrying across the hall so every noble and scholar could hear. Lisal, whose touch reversed the cursed blade, and whose light has shown us the error of our old ways. From this day she rules beside me, not as a banished healer, but as the equal partner who has taught a king humility and a kingdom hope. The court erupted in applause, some faces still carrying traces of hesitation, but many more softened with genuine respect, as Mira, the elder Omega from the forest camp, stepped forward with a small group of former outcasts, their simple garments contrasting the finery, yet shining with quiet pride. Lisal's heart swelled at the sight, the chosen family that had sustained her in exile now witnessing her rise, and she reached out to take Myra's hands in hers, the emotional dialogue flowing like a gentle current of healing. Mira, you who comforted me when the world cast me out, she said, her tone soft, yet empowering, laced with the poetic resonance of her gift. Today we begin rewriting what was written in silence. No longer will healers be labeled strange, or the powerless shamed for their touch. The laws will change because the voice of the different has proven stronger than any decree. Davil nodded, his gaze filled with pride as he stood beside her, the mate bond flaring with shared purpose, while the lead noble, now humbled from the public confrontation, stepped forward with a heavy scroll of royal edicts, his hands trembling slightly as he presented it. "Your Majesties," he began, his voice carrying reluctant acknowledgement. "The Council has reviewed the proposed revisions as you commanded. Those who carry strange gifts will gain rights to study the flow of time without banishment access, to equal council seats and protection from arbitrary exile. The old hierarchies that silenced the different will be dissolved." Lisal felt the fulfillment of her journey crest within her like a wave of light, chasing away the last shadows of trauma, the cinematic beauty of the hall alive with possibility. As she unrolled the scroll and began to speak, the changes allowed her voice weaving the strange shimmering sensation of her gift into the formal declarations, making the words themselves glow faintly on the parchment. From this day forward, she proclaimed, every wolf, regardless of Alpha, Beta, or Omega station, shall have the right to touch the strange without fear. No ruler may dismiss a voice based on perceived difference alone, and the forest settlements will receive resources equal to the capital, so no one remains invisible. The court listened in rapt silence, some nobles exchanging glances of surprise while others nodded with growing understanding as the laws took shape not through conquest, but through the empowering reversal she had brought from the wild. Davil placed his hand over hers on the scroll, the touch sending a surge of warmth through the bond. His emotional words meant for her alone, yet spoken publicly to seal the moment. "You have changed everything, Lisal," he said, his tone thick with the love that had earned its place through trials and trust. "I once rejected the bond out of blindness, but today I crown you queen, because your light has redeemed us both. Together we will build a realm where the strange is honored and every voice finds its power." Lisal's inner thoughts bloomed with profound gratitude and strength, the fulfilled journey from oppressed silence to this crowning moment, transforming her into the powerful queen who would ensure the different never suffered as she once had. Yet as the applause swelled and the new laws were recorded with fresh ink, a messenger approached the dais. His steps hurried with news that the first mixed council would convene at dawn to ratify the new measures, while faint reports from the outer courts spoke of lingering pockets of resistance, now fading under the weight of widespread approval. The coronation had crowned her queen, and the first laws had begun their rewrite, but Lisal felt the mate bond tighten with quiet resolve, knowing that while the foundation was laid, the full reshaping of the kingdom would demand one more stand before the legacy could truly dawn, leaving the hall alive with celebration and the subtle shadow of final opposition on the horizon. The council chamber hummed with a new energy the morning after the coronation, sunlight pouring through tall windows to bathe the long oak table in golden warmth, where once stern faces of nobles and scholars now softened with tentative acceptance as scrolls of revised edicts lay open before them like bridges built from ancient reversals to future hope. Lisal sat at the head beside King Davil, her crown resting lightly upon her brow, the subtle luminous aura from the ritual still glowing faintly around her, like a quiet promise of balance restored. Her inner thoughts flowed with profound fulfillment, the journey that had carried her from the humiliated flight through pouring rain to this seat of power, now culminating in the deep reshaping of the kingdom she had once been cast from. Every law they approved today would echo through generations, proving that the voice of the powerless could rewrite what pride had written in stone, and she felt the weight of that legacy not as burden, but as the empowering light that had always lived within her, waiting to shine. The lead noble, now fully humbled from the public confrontation, cleared his throat, his hands steady as he presented the final measures, the very changes that would dissolve old hierarchies and lift the strange into equality. "The council has deliberated, Your Majesties," he said, his voice carrying genuine respect where mockery once lived. "We approve the equal access to all healing arts for Omegas and Betas alike, the formation of mixed councils where every station holds a voice, and the allocation of resources to the forest settlements, so no one remains forgotten or shamed for their touch. These edicts will bind as law with your seal." Lisal felt her heart swell with cinematic clarity, the hall alive with the soft rustle of quills. Signing parchment, the faint shimmering light from her gift seeming to pulse in quiet approval, as if time itself witnessed the transformation. She leaned forward, her voice soft yet resonant with the poetic depth of her reversal that wove naturally into her words, making the moment feel sacred and unbreakable. These measures are not gifts, she told the council, her tone laced with emotional truth that touched every ear. They are rights long overdue, the same rights I claimed through the strange power you once feared. Let them stand as proof that from difference comes strength, and from the voiceless rises the power to heal a fractured realm. The nobles nodded, many with open admiration, as the scrolls received the royal seal, the approval, sealing deeper impact across the kingdom from capital halls to distant settlements where omegas would now touch the wounded without fear of banishment. In the quiet that followed, Mira and a small group of former outcasts from the forest camp were ushered in, their simple garments a reminder of the world Lisal had left behind, yet their faces glowed with hope as they approached the table. Myra's eyes brimmed with tears as she took Lisal's hands, the emotional scene unfolding like a gentle embrace between chosen family stronger than any bloodline. Child, you have done what we dared not dream, Mira whispered, her voice thick with gratitude that filled the chamber with warmth. We who labored unseen and whispered our strange gifts in secret now stand as equals because your touch refused to stay silent. The others murmured agreement, sharing stories of late-night reversals in the wild and the quiet resilience that had sustained them through years of oppression, their words weaving a tapestry of shared triumph that deepened Lisal's sense of purpose. I carried your kindness with me through exile, Lisal replied, her inner thoughts blooming with gratitude, the empowering realization that her rise lifted them all, transforming personal victory into collective light. Together we will ensure no one whispers in shadows again. The dialogue hung in the air like a healing balm, bridging past trauma to future promise as Davil watched with quiet pride, his hand finding hers beneath the table, the slow burn romance that had grown through regret and respect now culminating in a partnership forged in fire and harmony. Later, as the council dispersed and the outcasts departed with new scrolls of rights in hand, Davil drew Lisal to a private alcove overlooking the forest gardens where sunlight danced on blooming herbs that mirrored the renewed realm below. His powerful frame relaxed beside her, the mate bond thrumming with deep emotional warmth as he turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the full redemption that had reshaped his soul. Lisal, you have not only changed the laws, he said, his voice low and sincere, carrying the quiet promise that sealed their bond. You have changed me. I once rejected the bond out of blindness, but now I stand as your partner, in every sense equal in rule and in heart. Whatever future we build from this day, it will honor the strange, and every voice finds its power. She met his gaze, her heart opening fully to the earned intimacy, the cinematic beauty of the garden, framing their moment like a painting of hope restored. And I choose to walk it with you, she replied, her tone soft with empowering love, the poetic resonance of her words blending with the faint echo of her gift. Our partnership will be the foundation where chosen family thrives and every wolf finds power in their truth. The promise lingered between them, a quiet vow that deepened their connection into something enduring and bright. Yet as the sun climbed higher, a messenger approached the alcove, his steps hurried with news that the first mixed council would convene at dawn to ratify the new measures. While faint reports from the outer court spoke of lingering pockets of resistance, now fading under the weight of widespread approval, Lisal felt the mate bond strengthen with resolve. The laws rewritten in light had begun their lasting impact, but the full legacy of their shared future awaited in the sanctuary they would build together, leaving the kingdom on the threshold of a dawn where voices once silenced would echo forever in halls of equality and hope. The sun rose over the newly named Academy of Reversed Time like a golden promise painting the forest settlement in soft hues of hope. Where once hidden glades had stood now rose elegant halls of stone and glass, open to every wolf who wished to learn the flow of time and the forgotten arts that had long been silent. Lisal walked the wide pathways, her hand resting gently on the swell of her belly where the first air stirred with quiet strength, the subtle shimmering aura from the ritual still glowing faintly around her like a crown of inner light that made the entire kingdom feel reborn. Her inner thoughts flowed with profound cinematic fulfillment, the journey from the rainy humiliation in the medical tents where nobles had laughed and the king had banished her as too strange, to the storm-lashed forest where her touch first reversed wounds, and the quiet nights when she had whispered her gift into the wild, now culminating in this legacy of light that lifted every powerless soul. I have risen, she realized with overwhelming empowerment, the invisible healer once mocked for her strange power now walking as queen beside the man who had redeemed his blindness through love and respect, proving that the voiceless could reshape the world into a sanctuary where chosen family thrived beyond bloodline. The academy buzzed with life, young Omegas and Alphas studying side by side, their laughter mingling with the soft shimmering chants that echoed through sunlit classrooms, the equal council chamber nearby filled with representatives from every station debating laws with voices once dismissed now carrying equal weight in decisions that shaped the realm. Mira, the elder Omega, who had comforted her in exile, led a group of former outcasts through the gardens, their faces radiant as they tended blooms that symbolized renewal, the emotional scene unfolding like gentle waves of healing that washed away years of oppression. Lisal paused to embrace her, the warmth of their chosen family bond stronger than any royal decree, as she spoke with poetic depth. Mira, look at what we have built together, she said, her tone soft yet resonant with the empowering truth that had carried her through every trial. No longer will any wolf labor unseen or whisper strange gifts in secret. This academy stands as proof that the powerless hold the greatest light, and the equal council ensures every voice finds its place at the table. Davil joined them, his powerful frame relaxed in simple robes, the mate bond humming with deep emotional warmth as he placed a protective hand over Lisal, on her belly, the slow burn romance that had earned its place through regret and shared purpose now blooming into quiet partnership. He smiled at the sight of the children running through the paths, their laughter a melody of hope. The first mixed council session of the day already underway inside the hall where Alphas, Betas, and Omegas debated resource allocations with respect that had once seemed impossible. You have given us all a future we never dared dream, he murmured, his voice thick with the redemption that had reshaped his rule, his inner perspective in this legacy moment filled with awe at the woman who had transformed his kingdom from one of pride to one of harmony. The air you carry will inherit not a throne of fear, but a realm where every soul is seen and heard because of the touch that refused to stay silent. Lisal felt the child kick gently, as if sensing the bright horizon ahead, her heart swelling with cinematic clarity, the academy gardens stretching toward distant glades where new sanctuaries rose for healers of all stations, the equal council chambers alive with debates that wove the reversal gift into modern laws, protecting the strange and lifting the oppressed. In the naming ceremony held at sunset in the sacred glade, the gathered wolves watched as Davil lifted the newborn Arab boy with eyes that already held the spark of ancient wisdom and declared him heir to a legacy of reversed time. Lisal stood beside him, her hand on the child's head, the subtle aura glowing brighter as she hovered her hands above him, blessing him with harmony and strength, the emotional moment painting the glade in soft shimmering light that mirrored the healed realm now resting peacefully beyond the palace walls. This child will know a world where power is shared, she thought, the inner voice rising like a triumphant hymn, the journey from banished healer to powerful queen complete in its empowering art, proving that redemption through transformation and the voice of the voiceless could create a bright future where chosen family mattered more than any old bloodline. The ceremony ended with cheers echoing through the halls, the equal council members stepping forward to present gifts of herbs and scrolls symbolizing growth and knowledge for all as the sun dipped low, casting a hopeful horizon over the kingdom where forest settlements now thrived with equal resources and no one walked invisible. Lisal leaned into Davil, S sighed the mate bond, singing with enduring love as they looked out over the transformed realm. The academy lights twinkling like stars brought to earth the sanctuary halls, filled with students studying late into the night, the equal council planning further reforms that would ensure equality for generations. Her story has come to an end, but our journey together continues. If you found this story inspiring and meaningful, please like the video to support me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next empowering stories. And if you have any thoughts about the characters, her journey, or want to share your own story, please comment below. I really look forward to reading and chatting with you.